What's up, troopers? We're here to talk about another primary objectives. This is intercept the signals.
It's
Uh,
intercept signals, not intercept
Sorry,
the signals.
I apologize to
Different
all out
card and a
there.
different time.
Well, that
And
was
then,
intercept the transmissions also. So yeah, we're talking about a really different time. That one was much less complicated than this one is. So there's a few key points for this. One of which is that you each opponent has a home point that they're never going to be able to score themselves, but that their opponent can score against them. Uh, Another important item is that this is not an objective like close the pocket where the scoring is purely competitive. And in fact, that is, some would say, the thing about this objective is the fact that uh, it gives you the ability to have two units that are enabled to score points off of POI, even being vastly outnumbered if they have that intel token. Or you can, the opposite side, you, as long as you have a bunch of units and you're securing the POI, then you would get the exact same number of points just from securing it, which means that fairly often you end up in situations where both players are scoring from the same POI. And so, Mike, that leads us to a couple items. Maybe the most important of which is, who are you going to give those intel tokens to?
well, um, it is important to note that you don't always get to make that decision. In fact, sometimes it ends up being like units you kind of don't want it to be. You have to
Yeah.
pick three of your own.
Yep. And then your opponent picks two of them.
Picks two of them.
Yes.
So, sometimes can get kind of awkward, particularly if you are more of a Highlander list instead of a list that is taking multiples of units.
Right.
So, the best case scenario here is that you have three of exactly identical units that you want to perform this role, and you just pick all three, and your opponent's like, well, all right, great,
It's
we
those
picked
two.
two.
Yeah.
The more awkward situation is you're like, I really would like my Jedi to carry this intel token. You only have one Jedi, and you're like, okay, I pick this Jedi and these two arc units, and they're like, well, I'm gonna pick the arc units because
Right.
duh,
Right.
right? So generally, if you when you're playing your sub signals, you need to, and you're putting it in your deck, you need to have like a pretty good plan as to what those three units are and what the two units your opponent is going to pick. Generally, it's like pretty clear. There's like a clear, don't give it to the Jedi
Right.
pick there. So if you have two Jedi, great. But I would definitely be giving these two, put these in like one of two categories: cheap expendable units that are pretty fast. I would recommend Geonosians, naked Geonosians.
The Quaker Abyss.
Yes, or a Jedi is also pretty good. I think there's a situation where you could make the argument that something like a snail tank could also be particularly good at this
Hmm.
task. You know, I think it depends on the situation, but sometimes the armor can get overwhelmed, and that's like a pretty. What I would maybe caution people against here is oftentimes your intel, the units that end up with intel tokens have to be in very specific places on the board, and sometimes that clashes with their battlefield role if they are very important units.
And sometimes it clashes with the terrain that's around the POI. If you're talking about something like a snail tank that may have a difficult time maneuvering around there, especially if your opponent can sort of swarm it with a bunch of troopers, it could get kind of awkward. And yeah, I like what you're saying is that mobility is something that can definitely just get you there. And in those situations, you are often just sort of sending that unit off to die after scoring 1 point. But if they score the point, then they'll have done their job. The Jedi, on the other hand, especially if they have force push, they can potentially hang out on a unit on a POI all on their own, and via force push and activation control, um, just sort of like keep themselves alive. And maybe you're not actually even going to do attacks with them because that's not actually what their job is. uh, is that they're literally existing to hang out near the point and not die. Some Jedi can actually be very good at that, like Operative Luke. If Operative Luke wants to stay alive for the vast majority of the game, he can usually just do it. And so I would caution players against picking him as one of the people that has the intel token. Um, Another thing that I think is interesting about this is just like generally where your army is going to be, because I think that you you likely want to have like on the diamond that makes up the POIs. You likely want to pick either your left or your right side as being like the initial place that the real meat of your army is going to, because their job is going to be to win the POI the old-fashioned way by securing the point, and then you have these other guys that have intel tokens that are going to be scoring these POIs by having the intel token and existing, because when you specialize the array of your army like that, it makes it basically less likely that there's going to be waste in either direction. Um, and it also it importantly makes it more likely that your standard army that's going to win the old fashioned way, it's going to make it more likely that they can actually win the old fashioned way if you're minimizing the number of like units that can really do damage that are sort of wasting their time hanging out on a point that they're not actually going to win. So you kind of want to win hard on one side and then lose hard combat wise on the other side, but still score the points. And then on top of that, there is this angle of the fact that on that diamond, there is going to be the one that is on your opponent's home side. That can certainly factor into things, especially later in the game. It's relatively unusual for like on round two to be scoring your opponent's home point. It certainly can happen. You just need to be aggressive with it with a very mobile unit. Like maybe if you are running geos, it's not quite as hard. But
Yeah.
uh, another thing that we should talk about, Mike, is the concept of once you send that unit off to die and then it does die, is that there's this way to recharge your own units with intel tokens, and that can matter a lot. And so, Mike, what's something that you keep in mind when you're thinking about sort of recharging those units to become their own diving threat later on?
Their own
Yeah,
sacrificial
exactly.
units. Yeah, so I think one of the things that you need to really keep in mind here is that when you are placing your unit leaders to secure the POIs that you actually have, generally this is your strong side and your home point, you want the leaders that are potentially going to pick up new intel tokens to be basically the closest they can to whatever POI they're going to dive next so that you are not wasting time getting there. So that means if they're at home and they're going to engage like the right weak side POI, that they would be in like the like roughly like 1 to 2 o'clock position on your POI on the outside edge.
Right.
And
Because if they were at
and
8 o'clock, then they would have to actually travel the entire distance, like travel an entire range one to even be at the place that they could have been, which is literally an entire wasted move.
yeah, it's like you're just wasting moves left,
Yeah.
right, and center at that point. And potentially, like if you're on the complete opposite side of the POI that you should be, I actually think it's probably closer to a move and a half,
Mm.
in total.
Yeah.
So be very intentional about that if you can be, because these games can be short now as far as turns go, and having a unit out of position by like a move or two will lose you this objective in several situations. So make sure that you've got a game plan for, I probably need new Intel tokens. Who's going to get them? Where are they? How close are they to the places that I need them to be next?
Yeah.
And again, highly mobile units are like way better for this. You know, if you've got speeder bikes hanging out in reserve or Geonosians,
Right.
those are great targets and give you a lot of flexibility in the potential vulnerability of being in the wrong place at the right time.
Absolutely. Uh, Along the lines of the speed of the game, it is worth quickly noting that this is one of the relatively lower scoring primary objectives. It's certainly possible, but relatively uncommon in the grand scheme of things for either opponent to be scoring 3 points on any given round. So, like in that way, it's quite different from both close the pocket and recover the research, where scoring 3 points is going to be pretty common as far as like advancing the game state towards that end place of 12. So, this can be a primary where secondaries matter a little bit more, and it's a primary that is like a little bit less likely to have a game end on round 4 because of a high scoring game. Uh, and I think that another thing that is good to point out is that when it comes to deployment, the territory is like fairly broad. It's just like kind of a rectangle on your half. But what what you want to avoid as long as possible is your opponent knowing where your strong side is going to be, because you're ideally going to be in a position where they are wasting units, which is what we talked about earlier. Because if like any really sort of combat ready unit that is on their weak side, that is almost certainly going to die to your strong side, like that unit is basically going to waste. And basically the whole point of this objective is to minimize the amount of waste in your units. You again, you have the strong side that's actually doing the fighting, and then you have your weak side where you're diving and dying over and over and over again. And that way you're actually squeezing the utility out of all your units. That doesn't mean that you should deploy in the middle, because if you deploy in the middle, it can take you too long to actually get to one side or the other. But it's really probably more about unit choice when it comes to which ones you deploy first.
Yeah, and I definitely would make sure that you are trying to kind of like bait your opponent into maybe committing to a strong side early
Mm-hmm.
and kind of going from there. You know, it is a little bit of a game of chicken. You know, you're like, you gonna play your arc unit or not? You know, like, uh,
And it is a place also where the early units that you want to deploy are maybe like the units that matter less for fighting, such as a naked core unit. But then also, if you have a fast unit such as a speeder, you can always like that's the unit that you can flex to where if it looks like it did in fact deploy in your opponent's strong side, that even if it doesn't have an intel token, it can just sort of turn around and then get over to your own strong side pretty quickly, and then that way your opponent potentially deployed against a unit that's not actually gonna be actively fighting them on the side that they want to fight that unit on. So to kind of sum this one up, you generally want to have a strong side where you're going to win the old-fashioned way, and then one side where you're going to be winning via intel tokens. And for that latter one, that also does include your enemy's home POI when you have the opportunity to do that. Mobility is very key for the diving units, but then there are situations where a Jedi can get it done, because a Jedi with Force Push is basically the most survivable type of unit in the game. Uh, Try not to waste your intel tokens. Give them to the units that are going to be sort of taking care of business on their own, and you don't want them hanging out near your strong side doing nothing because you're already winning the point. And then try to delay your opponent realizing which is the strong and the weak side for as long as you can. Mike, do you have any other like big points to add on top of that stuff?
I would just add to the Intel deploying Intel units bullet point that if somebody deploys an Intel unit early, you can sort of make the choice to be like, all right, my strong side is actually going to be, someplace other than where the Intel unit is. And that way you can force a fight, like a big fight, and their Intel unit is all of a sudden like doing the thing that it didn't need to be doing. It needed to be somewhere else.
Exactly.
There's not enough Intel tokens to make mistakes like that,
Nope.
frankly. So,
All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching. Thank you to Jacob Camp for producing. If you like what we do, then consider checking our Patreon. And we will see you on the next TFT mini.